The start of the VCT Pacific League is almost here, so it's time to go through all 12 teams and rank them from best to worst heading into the season. We're going to talk about how these teams did in the offseason in terms of results. We're going to be looking at their additions and negations, and rank all these teams from best to worst based off of how I see them. So this is the board we have today. We will be starting from 12 to 1, so going from worst to best. And starting off this list is Boom Esports at number 12. So Boom Esports is definitely an interesting team to look at heading into the season, getting to the grand final at that Ascension tournament to play against Sin Prisa Gaming, who did beat them, but then because of Bleed being a really terrible org, Boom were then allowed in. And there's definitely a lot more hype around that Sin Prisa roster, which is now non-Shim Red Force, than there is for Boom. Boom Esports not being seen as a top team in Tier 2 until they had a very good run at that Ascension tournament. But it seems like the general consensus is this team doesn't have that high of a ceiling when you look at the other teams, and just naturally being one of the Ascension teams, I decided to put them at the number 12 spot. I feel like that's a pretty good place to put them for now. I overall don't think they're going to end up as the worst team in the entire Pacific throughout the whole year, but just heading into Kickoff, that is where I see them. They also have a very tough matchup right away at the Pacific bracket. They're playing T1 to start, which should go to T1, but crazier things have happened. So Boom's going to be a team to watch. Will they prove everybody wrong and show that they should have been the number 1 Ascension team? Or are they going to crash and burn and be known as one of the basement dwellers in this region? We will see. Moving on to number 11 is a team that has rebuilt their entire roster, and that is Global Esports. Global's been a pretty bad team in the Pacific League for the past 2 years with 2 very different rosters, and now they are heading into their 3rd year of the VCT Pacific with yet another entirely new roster. This time opting to not bring in any Indian players, a country that the organization is from, and they built a roster that is a mix of a lot of different players from a lot of different countries. A lot of Filipino players, but they also have a Russian in Crystal who looks like he's going to be their best player, and picking up some Korean talent in Udotan, as well as some talent from Singapore in Darion, formerly of Bleed. And this team's offseason wasn't very plentiful. They only played in their own event that they put on, the Global Esports Face-Off. They did win 3 out of 5 matches. They did lose to Boom actually, so you could use that as evidence that Boom actually might be better than them. But they beat a Chinese team in All Gamers. They beat a team called Rare Adam, a Tier 2 team, and it was just a 5-match event with some lesser known teams, so I can't really take too much from that. But for now, I just can't really see where this roster is going to be, so I'm picking the safe option as putting them in one of the bottom 2 spots, so then at least they can only exceed my expectations unless they somehow get even worse than they were the last 2 years. They are going up against Team Secret at the start of the Kickoff bracket. That is a winnable match, but we'll see where that one goes. Definitely curious as to how this new roster with this new coaching staff, with players that are just from a variety of different countries, do language barriers end up becoming an issue? Is Crystal the player that he is said to be? I definitely think that there is something here for this roster, but a lot of things need to go right for them to have a very good year, so I'm putting them pretty low on this power ranking for now. Moving on to number 10, we have a team that only made 1 change, but I'm starting to think that this roster isn't really going to do much this year, and that is RRQ. So RRQ has some interesting pieces for sure. They picked up Monyet partway through the season last year after he was dropped by PaperX, and the roster overall doesn't really look bad. Players like Estrella and Jemkin are definitely solid players, but last year there was definitely some things that kept this team from reaching their true potential, lacking a bit of cohesion, not really having chemistry with one another. Maybe with a new player in the mix in Cushy, things improved for them, but I think just with the fact that they had a roster that was pretty mid last year, they're heading into this year with only 1 change, bringing in Cushy. Maybe he ends up being great for them, but I think this is a roster that probably needed more changes than that. So based off of those things, I'm putting them pretty low. There is some talent there, but I don't know if they're gonna be able to upset some of the teams that are going to be above them on this power ranking. Moving on to number 9, we have a very interesting team that also didn't make a lot of changes in the offseason. In fact, they didn't make any, and that is Team Secret. Team Secret is definitely a weird team. They're a team that last year was in the middle of the pack in the Pacific, but they kind of ended up being like the Na'Vi of the Pacific region, a team that looked pretty solid during those regular season splits, being able to upset some pretty heavy hitters like PaperX. They beat Gen G at one point. This team definitely looked like they were really solid at different points in the season. However, every time they got to playoffs, they were in the single elimination stage, and they lost both of those matches. That just denied them making any international throughout the year. So they end up keeping the roster that they had at the end of last year. They brought in Wild Oreo partway through the year. So they're doing the opposite of what Na'Vi did, which is do nearly a full rebuild rebuild, and maybe it ends up working out for Team Secret. I am putting them pretty low on this list because I think there are some teams that improved a lot more than they did. And their offseason in the Predator League event was not very good. They lost to 2 Tier 2 teams in Rivals and Next Gen. But they were playing with that Wild Oreo. They weren't at full strength for that one, and it's offseason. We can throw that away. I do have them doing decent in my Pick'ems video, but overall, I don't think this team is going to be a heavy hitter in the Pacific. When it comes to the pack of the mid-range teams in this league, there's just so much talent, so much improvement from a lot of teams in the offseason that I just feel like Team Secret maybe didn't make the right moves by keeping the roster exactly the same, but we will see. Moving on to number 8, we have a team that did not have the season that they wanted to in 2024, and that is Zeta Division. The hype for Zeta Division over the years has definitely died down a bit. They used to be a really solid Japanese team, having a good run at Reykjavik 2022, but then ever since that tournament, this team has struggled to find relevancy, not being able to make it to any international tournaments since 2022. They even missed out on their hometown tournament for Tokyo, and despite trying to upgrade the roster in the 2023 offseason, this team did not bounce back in 2024. Now they bring in 3 new players from the Tier 2 team in Fennel, and so far these changes have actually seemed to bear some pretty decent results. In the Red Bull Homegrown APEC qualifier, they were able to beat teams like DFM. They even technically beat T1, but that was a one-map game. And then at the Riot Games 1 Invitational Tournament, they were able to beat DFM again, but yes, it was a one-map game as well. But also Leviathan in that event. They did lose to Fnatic, but they did beat 2 teams that one is above them in this power ranking, and another is a team that I think could be a dark horse in the Americas. So overall, I don't want to take too much from the offseason results, but some other teams have gone a lot farther up this list because of their offseason results, so I figured I would give Zeta at least a decent amount of credit. Number 8 isn't the highest. I don't see this team as a top 6 team in the region, but I think they're going to be better than they were last year. Maybe they end up making it to some sort of international or playoffs this year. I don't know if I see that for them, but they should at least be in the regional playoffs in that middle pack, hoping to qualify for a spot, but I think number 8 is a fair spot for them for now. Moving on to number 7, we have a team that might be being overrated at this point, but there is seemingly a pretty high ceiling for this team. I'm of course talking about non-Shim Red Force. So this was the Sinprisa gaming roster that qualified to the VCT Pacific League through Ascension. Sinprisa was purchased by Red Force, so they are under a new banner. This team's story is very impressive. They were a team that came all the way from Premier and then went on a tear in the Korean Tier 2 scene. If you count from the last split of that Korean Tier 2 into Ascension, this team is on a 16 game winning streak. They have not lost in a long time. Are they going to be able to do that in the VCT? Probably not, is my guess. But with just how good players like Perza looked, with how impressive their story has been, I think I see this team having a lot more promise than some of the teams below them. They haven't played in quite a long time is my concern. We haven't seen this team at an offseason event, so with a lack of practice and not being ingrained in the off-season events, that might end up being bad for them. So maybe they come in a bit cold, but this is a team that could maybe see themselves in the top 5, top 4 of the region by the end of the year. So maybe they start a bit cold. I am kind of expecting that, but I think overall this team is going to be dangerous. Very curious to see what ends up happening for this non-Shim team, and it's impressive to have an Ascension team this high on the power rankings right off the bat. But we'll see if that ends up being too much hype and this team can't live up to it. We will see. It's a lot to live up to. Moving on to number 6, we have a team that I really did not think I was going to put this high heading into the season, but they did have an impressive offseason, so I'm putting DFM at number 6. So there is a chance that DFM's offseason results are being overrated a bit. They didn't do great at their last offseason tournament in the Riot Games 1 Invitational. They lost 2 out of 3 matches in the Red Bull Homegrown APEC qualifier, but this team had a very impressive run at the Radiant Asia Invitational tournament, beating teams like Paper X, beating teams outside of the region in Edward Gaming and Trace. Very impressive wins. And while they didn't win that tournament, losing to Paper X in the rematch, this team looked a lot better than what they used to. With players like May finally being in a position to succeed, he can finally show off his skill without being on just a team that is just not skilled at all. They brought in a mix of tier 2 players in Art, Akame, Jinbon, Gwen. They still have their sub in C's. There is a discussion that Gwen might not be the best option and maybe C's should be the one in there. So we'll see what this roster ends up doing, but I think this team has shown a lot of promise and I'm excited to see what they do. It's exciting to see that this team is finally not just a default number 12 in the region like they have been for the past 2 seasons. Again, maybe they're being a bit overrated, maybe them being higher than some other teams in the second half of the board isn't like a great idea, but I like to be an optimist sometimes, so DFM, you're going at number 6. Don't prove me wrong. Moving on to number 5, we have a team that I almost put lower than this, but I figured they've been a good team for a minute. Maybe they'll still be a good team. And that team is DRX. So DRX went through a lot of changes in the offseason. They only have one player left from the Vision Strikers roster that they had for a long time, Mako being the last man standing of that. They got rid of players like Foxy9 in the offseason. They briefly got rid of Bane, but then they brought him back. And that was just a week ago where they swapped him out for Athens. So we'll see how that ends up going. Maybe that kind of messes with their whole, chemistry at the beginning of the season. But maybe Freen and Hyman end up being solid additions to this team. Hyman definitely has a lot of promise. Looks like Freen is going to be this team's IGL, at least for the time being. We'll see if they have another just IGL swap throughout the year like they did last year. Flashback showed a lot of promise last year. We finally got to see him on the international stage at Champions, and he did a good job there. And they still have Mako, who is an incredible smokes player. Hopefully being off of the IGL role is going to allow him to flourish again. So while I'm not as excited about this team as I used to be, this team has shown that they are pretty good at picking talent in the Korean region, bringing them in, getting them adjusted to their system in a very impressive way, and have them perform pretty well. They didn't make 2 out of 3 internationals last year, but they were still a solid team within their own region. So I think they're still at least top 5. I think they've dropped down a bit from what I would have put as like a top 2, top 3 team the year prior, at least if we're talking about the beginning of 2024, not during the season. I do have some faith in them, so I'm putting number 5. Moving on to number 4, we have a team that also I feel like could go lower than this, but I figured I would also give them the benefit of the doubt. I guess I'm just being optimistic this video. Talon is at number 4. So Talon ended up being the 4th seed coming into Champions. They got there off of championship points, but there is an argument to be made that they weren't the 4th best team in the Pacific for most of the year. But they did do something impressive and bring in a new player at the end of stage 2 in Primi, a highly sought after ranked player in the Pacific region, and he got acclimated pretty fast. He definitely had some kinks to work out. He was a ranked demon, so just coming into pro play, it's very different from ranked. But if they've worked out those kinks in his game, then Primi should be in a pretty good position to succeed. They didn't make any changes in the offseason, opting to keep the core that they had. Ban, Governor, Jip Boys, and Cruz are all making a return. They definitely are a solid team, which is why I put them in the top 4, because I didn't want to punish them too much for an up and down offseason. Not doing great at the Soup League, doing okay at the 10 Invitational, beating DRX. There is some promise to this team. Maybe they end up going far. I do have them getting upset in my kickoff bracket, but that was meant to be an upset, so that means I do think that they're better than the team that I put them in. Not gonna spoil it, you can watch that video. But Talon, I think overall, is a good team. They have some good talent. Will they make internationals this year? I'm not super confident, but they do have a roster that could go on a run this year. Moving on to number 3, we have a team that was probably just undoubtedly number 1 for most of 2024, if not all of it, and that is, of course, Gen G. Gen G still have 3 players from that Shanghai winning roster in Texture, Karen, and Munchkin. Munchkin being the IGL, he had a great year. Texture proved that he was probably the best duelist in the Pacific region and potentially the best duelist in the world. And Karen was probably Rookie of the Year next to players like Woot. So this team still has a really solid base, a really solid core that still has the coaching staff from last year. However, the losses that they suffered in the offseason, one in particular, is a really big one that I can't ignore. Lakia and Meteor are not returning to this roster. Lakia doesn't have a roster spot right now, but Meteor went over to T1, and he looks like he hasn't skipped a beat, and he is an incredible player. So in terms of the replacements that Gen G did, it's just not enough. Foxy9 and Noman are the replacements. Yeoman looks like an upgrade on Lakia, but Foxy9 is undoubtedly a downgrade on Meteor. Meteor was just so good for them last year on that Sentinel role. He was just a clutch god for them, and I don't think the replacements that they brought in make me think that they're going to be the best team in this region yet again. I still think they're top 3. I almost put them at number 2, but there is a team that I think is better than them on paper. I do expect to see Gen G at internationals, but I can see them missing out on, say, Bangkok. This is definitely a team to watch in the 2025 season. I really hope these players are hearing the noise around them and want to just shut it down and prove everyone wrong. I would love to see them reclaim their crown in Pacific, but for now, I think they have a lot to prove. Speaking of teams that have a lot to prove, Paper X. So I debated whether or not I wanted to put Paper X at number 2. However, I think the meta right now is very good for them. Neon just got nerfed, so in terms of duelists, we'll be seeing a lot of Jet again, we'll be seeing a lot of Raze. Maybe ISO becomes a prominent figure in the duelist role. I could see that happening. We'll see if that's good for them. But that combined with the fact that this team, they've been together for a very long time, and they've been together for that long for a reason. They are an incredibly talented crop of players who have been one of the top teams in the entire world for at least 2 years. However, what they did in 2024 was very much a downgrade from where they've been in the past. Having an okay performance at Madrid, but really not showing up for either Shanghai or Champions. This team not only needs to go on a deep run at an international this year, they need to win an international this year if they're going to prove that this roster staying together is the right decision. They haven't been able to get it done. They don't have that trophy that they were looking for, but now the pressure is off them to be the first team in the Pacific League to win a trophy. Gen.G took that mantle last year, so no other team has to worry about that. Paper X, I think, needs to play like they don't have any pressure. They have pressure, but I think they need to just play the way that helps them succeed, which seems to be just low pressure, hyper-aggressive play, W gaming just working to a T, and maybe this is the meta to do it, especially because now we're having Tejo come in right before the season starts. That's just gonna throw everything into chaos, and Paper X thrive in chaos. So I could see them getting off to a really good start at Kickoff and having a solid tournament and qualifying for Bangkok, but I just don't think that this team is the best team in the region right now. And that is because of a team that made some massive upgrades over the offseason, and that is T1. Already talked about Meteor, Clutch God, best Sentinel in the world potentially. He is on this team now. That is an absolute godly pickup for this organization. But another great addition is Buzz, formerly of DRX, one of the best duelist players in the entire region for at least like 3-4 years now. But they also pick up Buzz, formerly of DRX, a very talented duelist player, being one of the best duelist players in the region for at least like 3 years. And players like Sylvan, Izu, and a player they picked up partway through the season in Stacks seems like a pretty deep core here. And with players like Sylvan, Izu, and a player they picked up partway through the season in Stacks, this team just looks incredibly dangerous. They won the Red Bull Homeground event, very impressive work there, beating some pretty heavy hitters to be able to get to that point. In terms of the offseason, they've only lost one match, and that was against Zeta Division in a one-map game at the Red Bull Homeground APAC qualifier. And one-map games are one-map games. I don't think they lose that if it's 3 maps. I think this team is primed to go on a very good run. I think this meta is going to be great for them. I think the map pool is going to be great for them, and they just have too much talent. They seem like they're going to have a really good structure this year. Stacks as the IGL, maybe that's questionable, but he has a lot of experience in it before, and now he's playing with Buzz again. So this team is primed for a strong year. I do think they're going to be top 2 at Kickoff. This team is going to be dangerous. Maybe they end up crashing and burning like Energy did last season, but I just don't see it with this roster. There's just too much good here for me to have a negative opinion on them, and I think that they're going to be the best in the entire region. But let me know what you guys think. What are your rankings? How do you think my rankings did? What do you think I'm wrong on? What do you think I'm right on? Let me know in the comment section down below. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.